roughly the same strategy, a armed resistance over almost half a century, and ultimately, from their perspective at least, succeeding in making India free. So who were the forefathers of this movement? Well, I'm ignoring here the resistance that you had in the 19th century by the old elite, the nobility and so on, who had of course in 1857 been entirely crushed. And although there were occasional acts of resistance that you see, for example in Manipur, they were not really pertinent to what I'm going to talk about. The revolt by the revolutionaries really starts out at the turn of the century, and those who led it included a group of people particularly coming out of Punjab, Maharashtra and Bengal. They were characters like Aurobindo Ghosh, later known as Sri Aurobindo, his brother Barin Ghosh, there was Veer Savarkar, and there were others like Raj Bihari Bose and so on. They also had a lot of support from within the Congress party. So in this period, there were two groups inside the Congress party, the Naram Dal and the Garam Dal. And the Garam Dal was of course very famously led by the trio of Lal, Bal and Pal. And they provided a lot of ideological and other support to this armed resistance that began to build out in the 1900s and before the First World War. However, this whole effort unwound very, very quickly. There was the Alipur bomb case, or also known as the Maniktala bomb case, where Barin Ghosh was captured along with many of his acolytes, and they were shipped off to Kalapani in the Andamans. Sri Aurobindo was captured, he was let off, and then he escaped very famously to Pondicherry. In London, where a group of young students were beginning to organize themselves in a student hostel called India House, led by Veer Savarkar, they also came under a lot of pressure, and following an assassination that was done by one of Savarkar's supporters in London, Savarkar himself was arrested, and then despite an attempt to escape from the prison ship in Marseille, he was ultimately ended up also in Kalapani. And meanwhile, many others were also arrested, and so this very first attempt at armed insurrection unwound very, very quickly. The only real gain from this, however, was a spread of revolutionary ideas. In particular, a book written by Veer Savarkar on the 1857 revolt. Now, this was a very important book, and although Savarkar himself would remain in prison for many, many years and would later drift away from the revolutionary movement, this book would continue to have an enormous impact on the imagination of the revolutionaries. And the basic point that this book made was that India could only be freed by essentially getting the Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army to revolt. This is what had happened in 1857, and Savarkar made the case that this was the strategy through which freedom could be had. And so you will see over the next over the next 3-4 decades, many of the attempts to free India by the revolutionaries ultimately aimed at causing an insurrection amongst the British soldiers working for the Indian soldiers working for the British.